Okay, today's daf is Samech Aleph. We're going to start in about 5 lines from the top. Really, we should have finished this last piece yesterday, but I curtailed it inadvertently because it was still kind of in the same in the middle of the same discussion. So the issue here was we had on the previous Amud that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi mentioned that if the Techum, if you measure the Techum from a certain position, let's say from somewhere out in the field, and the Techum ends in the middle of a city, so you can only walk up to the middle of the city. But if, perchance, the Techum overlaps the city completely, so then the entire city is considered only like 4 amot. This is what we learned yesterday. And Rav Idi said, this is just divrei neviut. This is just prophecy. In other words, this doesn't have any logical reason behind it. It's just a tradition. It's just something that you're telling me, but it can't be demonstrated from any source. And then Rava said, "What are you talking about? It can't be demonstrated from any source." There's a statement that he quotes from a Braita that people from a large city and people from a small city, that the people from the large city are allowed to go, walk through the entire small city, and people from the small city are not allowed to walk through the large city. And he explains that what we're talking about there is basically so he says, so you see that where the Techum makes it only halfway through, like the small city can't go through the entire large city because their Techum must stop in the middle of the large city. The large city people can walk through the entire. Oh, it is, yeah. The large city can. The people in the large city can walk even past the small city because their Techum encompasses the entire small city. So therefore, the entire small city is considered like 4 amot. That's what we said yesterday. And then the response was that Rabbi Idi will tell you that no. There are 2 situations here. One is benoten and one is moded. And that's what we left off. That benoten, if you put your... he said, first of all, there's no such thing as a case where it doesn't work. You have the wrong text in your Mishnah. The text in the Mishnah is supposed to be that the people in the large city and the people in the small city are both allowed to traverse the entirety of the other city. And there's a difference between noten and moded, which means to say, if I put my eruv inside a city, that entire city is like 4 amot for me. And now I measure 2,000 amot from the edge of the city, not from where I put the eruv. Let's say I put the eruv in midtown of Manhattan. That doesn't mean that I measure the Techum from midtown. I measure it from the edge of the city. Okay? So similarly, and that would apply to any city. But if I put the Techum, the eruvei Techumin in the middle of a forest, and I measure the 2,000 amot from that point to the next city, and the Techum ends in the middle of the city, in that situation I can only walk up to the middle of the city. Because that's where my Techum ends at a certain point. Whereas when I put the Eruvei Techumin in a city, I'm saying this city is my place. So the entire city is my place. Whereas if I'm in the forest, all I am is where I'm sitting. So I can only measure the 2,000 amot from where I'm sitting. I don't get the entire... So wherever, if it ends in the middle of the city, that's where it ends. That's all. Now, so now it says vil. So we're up to the word where it says vilo. Vilo, is it true that with regard to moded, with regard to a situation where your eruvei techumin is outside the city and you start measuring the techum and it ends in the middle of the city, we don't have a Mishnah to back that up, but it says in the Mishnah v'la moded she'amru notnim lo alpayim ama she'afilu sof midato kala b'ma'ara. So he says that in this case, we have a precedent for this as well, because we're trying to find out why did Rabbi Idi say that the statement of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi was divrei neviut, that it was just prophetic visions, it wasn't anything that we have a basis for. It's not true, because the Mishnah says that even if you place your eruvei techumin out in the middle of the forest and you measure those 2,000 amot and the 2,000 amot stop in the middle of a cave, so wherever the 2,000 amot line is, you have to stop on a dime. That's the place you can go. You don't say, well, since the Techum ended in the middle of the cave, I get the whole cave. So too, you wouldn't say, since it ended in the middle of the city, I get the whole city. You wouldn't say that. So why are you telling me that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi's halakha is a chidush and can't be shown from another source? It's right in the Mishnah. that if I put my Eruv Tchumin anywhere, I measure 2,000 amot, and even if it stops in the middle of a cave, that's where I have to stop. So too, even if it stops in the middle of the city, that's where I have to stop. There's your source. He answers, no. Sofa ir itzrichale dilatanan. So what the Gemara says is that what was bothering Rabbi Idi, what he meant when he said it was divrei neviut, that it wasn't based in any source, wasn't the case where you have to stop in the middle of the city. He says that makes sense. Because you get 2,000 amot. What does it matter where the 2,000 amot end? You get 2,000 amot from wherever you put your Eruv Tchumin. What he thought was unusual was the second part of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, which is that if your Tchum, let's say you were 1,000 amot outside of the city, where you put your Tchum, your Eruv Tchumin, and the city itself is only 1,000 amot wide. So that means that if you stretch you get your first 1,000 to the edge of the city, second 1,000 to the end of the city, now that entire city becomes like 4 amot. And now all you traversed was, even though you walked 2,000 amot physically from where you left the Eruv Tchumin to the edge of the city, we only treat it as 1,004 amot. Okay? That, he said, there's no basis for. Why should that be? Wherever the Tchum ends, it ends. So what? It ended at the edge of the city. Why should I make the city smaller now? If you put the Eruv Tchumin in the city, I understand. You're saying the whole city is your place. But if you put it outside the city, why should I extend your Tchum even further because it happened to overlap with the entire city? Why should the city now be reduced to 4 amot?
I would tend to view it the other way, though, because it's logical that once you're inside the city, you don't even need the Tchum anymore. I mean, you have the Tchum.
But you're relative to your Tchum. That's the problem. You had a point of departure.
If you're inside, why would you need a Tchum?
But because you're outside of the Tchum relative to where you left.
Okay,
that's why.
But you left. You're
only allowed to
carry that. But then once you're inside, because you have a roof inside there, then the Tchum becomes irrelevant.
But the Eruv Tchumin is relative to your position at the start of Shabbat. So it doesn't matter.
But the Tchum is gone, it's over.
Why is it over?
Because you're inside.
But you let's say, imagine you're standing at point A. You put down the Eruv Tchumin.
Yeah.
You get now, and 2,000 amot you're allowed to walk to the east.
Okay.
So if you're 2,000 amot that you walk to the east end, right at Main Street in the middle of the city, that's all you can walk. It's 2,000 amot. You walk 2,000 amot from your position. Why does it matter that you're in the middle of the city?
Because it's free walking in the city. Because anybody can walk in the city.
Because anybody can move in the city.
But you can't if you're coming from an outside.
But if you're coming from the outside. No, because you came from the outside, you only get 2,000 amot. Because you're not from the city. Your place of Shevitah was outside the city.
Okay, so that...
If you had started Shabbat in the city, you're right. Then you can walk wherever you want.
But because you're okay, so that's where the issue. Okay.
Right. Okay. So that's the chidush here. So now the Gemara says, okay. Amar Rav Nachman says, Man detanya anshe lo mishtabesh, man detanya en anshe lo mishtabesh. There were two versions in the Mishnah. One that said that anshe, and one that said en anshe. Okay, meaning one that said that the people from city A can traverse the entirety of city B, and one that said that they cannot. Okay, man detanya anshe lo mishtabesh. So the one that said anshe, meaning the one that said that they can traverse the entirety of the city, it's not a mistake. Dimokim la b'modet. I'm sorry, dimokim la b'noten, because that's the case where they placed their eruv. In other words, even if I live in the small city or I live in another city, and there's a neighboring city that's 1,000 amot away, I put my eruv in that city. Okay, so now that entire city becomes 4 amot. Everybody agrees with that. Even though I slept in my city. Okay, I slept in whatever city I'm from, but I put my Eruv Tchumin in the city, in the other city, which is within 2,000 amot of where I'm sleeping, so I'm able to get there. Okay, I put it there. That entire city is my 4 amot. I don't say where I placed it makes a difference. Wherever it is 4 amot from there. Wherever it is, the whole area is 4 amot, the whole city. And man detane en anshe, the one that says that the people from the small city cannot traverse the large city, lo mishtabesh. It's not a mistake. Dimokim la b'moded. That's talking about b'moded, where you're measuring. In other words, where you're not you didn't place your Eruvei Tchumin in the city, you placed it outside the city, and it's the 2,000 amot from the point where you placed the Eruvei Tchumin and in the middle of the city, so that's as far as you can go. If you put the Eruvei Tchumin in the city, you get the entire city. If you put it outside the city, you only get 2,000 amot from the place that you put it, which could end right in the middle of the city.
What would you do at Bimoded?
Bimoded is where you place the Eruvei Tchumin outside the city.
Oh, okay.
And you're measuring 2,000 amot, and it happens to end right in the middle of Bethesda. I don't know, whatever the city is, right? Right in the middle of Yerushalayim.
Right.
So that's all you can go.
Okay.
If you placed it in Yerushalayim, you get the entire Yerushalayim. It's like 4 amot. But if you placed it outside Yerushalayim, now all you get is up to the 2,000 amot from where you left it. Okay, so v'chazoi mechasra, and we could correct the Mishnah. This is what it means. The people from the small city, the people from the large city are allowed to walk the entire distance of the small city, but the people of the small city cannot walk the entire distance of the large city. When is this true? B'moded, when we're measuring. In other words, when they put the Eruvei Tchumin in between the two cities. Okay, and when you walk 2,000 amot from, let's say that city A is to the west of city B, so you're walking to the east. Okay, so you placed the Eruvei Tchumin to the east. Now you can walk from that Eruvei Tchumin another 2,000 amot to the east, and it ends in the middle of the city. Okay, aval misha ya ba'ir gdola v'yineach et eruva b'ir ktana. Haya b'ir ktana v'yineach et eruva b'ir gdola melechet kula v'chutz la alpayim ama. However, if you lived in the small city and you placed your Eruvei Tchumin in the large city, or vice versa, you lived in the large city and you placed your Eruvei Tchumin in the small city, you get the entire city is considered like 4 amot, and you get 2,000 amot in every direction from that city. Just like as if you stayed in the city. Amar Rav Yosef said, Amar Rami Bar Abba, that Rami Bar Abba said, Amar Rafona, that Rafona said, Irshi Yoshevet al Sifat HaNachal, Im Yesh Lefanei Adaka, Arba'a Modedin La Misifat HaNachal, V'im Lav, En Modedin La El Mipetach Beto. So we're going to go with Rashi's interpretation here. There's several other interpretations, and the way the Shulchan Aruch learns is different than the way that the Rishonim on the Daf actually learn. So it's a totally different interpretation. So we're just going to go with Rashi for ease and consistency's sake for today. So basically what it says is if you have a village or a town that's on the riverbank, if it has a dakka, now remember a dakka was some kind of a 4, now here we're saying 4 tefachim, it says at first. Arba'a is tefachim because that's masculine. So a 4 tefach dakka was this little kind of board separating. In other words, it has to be 4. So you have the town on the riverbank, and along the town is a 4 tefach high sort of little fence or something, little board going across between the town and the riverbank. So then you count the tchum of the town from the riverbank. What's the reason? Because since the entire town is now considered to be one entity, okay, that fence is the point at which you're going to start counting the tchum. However, if there's nothing there, however, if you don't have a fence there, then we count from each individual has to count from their own house, which means if you have an entire town, some people are going to be able to walk more in one direction than another because each person has to calculate their own tchum. What's the reason? Because since they don't have something separating them from the riverbank, and the riverbank is a volatile place to be because there's flooding and there's all kinds of other issues, so therefore we don't consider it to be a permanent settlement. So just like we learned a few dapim ago, sometime last week, we learned about the tents, the people who live in tents or the people who live, in these temporary dwellings, they're not considered to be a town. They're not considered to be a city because it's not stable. So too, being on the riverbank without anything breaking the waves, basically anything to break the water, is also considered only temporary. This is the way Rashi interprets it. Amar le Abai says, Taka arba amot amrat lan Allah. He said that you told us not arba'ah, which means 4 tefachim. You told us arba amot amrat lan Allah. You told us 4 amot. It has to be 4 amot high, not just 4 tefachim. What's the difference between this case of the riverbank and every other case? That in every other case we've said a daka, a small partition has to be only 4 tefachim high, like with the ladder that went into the courtyard that we learned about yesterday. And here you're telling me it has to be 4 amot. He said, the difference is that over there's no danger. Here there's danger. In other words, people recognize that it's a little bit precarious to be right on the riverbank when during the rainy season there's all kinds of flooding without anything higher to break the waves or to break the water, to prevent the water from coming in and devastating the town. So if you don't have a high enough partition, it's not going to establish it as a real town. We're going to look at it as people camping out by the river, even if they build houses, because it's only temporary. Okay, this is the way Rashi interprets it. Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says, "Mana amin Allah." Where do I get this from? The Tanya, because we learned in a Braita. Hitir Rabbi permitted Shihu b'nei Geder Yoredin leChamatan ve'en b'nei Chamatan olin legeder. That the people from Geder were allowed to go to Chamatan, but not the people from Chamatan could not go to Geder. What was the reason? And notice that Geder is obviously on an incline. It's higher than Chamtan. You could see the drawing in Rashi. At least I have a drawing in my Rashi here of the. There's an incline. So that's why it says Yoredin. The people of Geder Yoredin, and the people from Chamatan are Olin. They're going up, right? Do you have that in there?
Yeah.
You have that? Okay. Yeah. Right. So you have it. Okay. All right, so what's the reason? So So must it not be that the people from Chamatan couldn't go up to Geder? Why not? Because they didn't have a daka, they didn't have a board making them into a real city. So since they didn't have that partition, apparently they were on a river. There was some kind of a similar situation that required some kind of a. So Rashi explains that he says, isn't it all contingent upon having a partition? So it says Geder v'Chamtan yoshvin behar b'shipua. Okay, Geder l'mal v'Chamtan lemata. That they both rested. This is Rashi. That they both rested on a hill. Geder was above and Chamtan was below. And since they're both on an incline, they require some kind of a daka, some kind of a board, on one side. Apparently the reason is because of the precariousness of resting the houses on an incline, or so it would seem. Okay.
What is the point? It holds the water, or
It holds the ground against landslide.
I guess it prevents it from sliding, right? It prevents it from sliding.
Oh, so it's like a retaining wall.
Yeah, I guess that we could call it a retaining wall. Yeah. So the kasal kadatach sheushteen muvlaot zo kula bitoch alpaim shel chaverta, and it would seem that that right now the Gemara is assuming that they're both within 2,000 amot of one another. Okay. The katane b'nei geder yoredin lachamtan la bishum de b'nei geder avud daka. So the Gemara suggests that the reason why the people of Geder are allowed to go down is because they have a daka, they have this retaining wall, which means that they are considered to be not just camping out on the hill, but really having a permanent settlement there. Okay? לפיכך כל יושבי כשרוצים ללך לחמתן מתחילים למנות ולמדוד מחומתה לצד חמתן כשאר עיירות והרי חמתן כולה מובלעת בתחומן. So he says that what happens is that once they have that retaining wall, so now from that wall to the people to Chamtan, you can walk 2,000 amot from that wall. The entirety of Chamtan is within 2,000 amot of that wall. So even if you live at the top of Geder, so you're 1,000 amot from that wall, it doesn't matter. You still measure from that wall because that wall is the edge of your city. Whereas if you didn't have that daka, apparently, you would have to count from your house. So the people who lived at the top of Geder would not be able to reach Chamtan necessarily. Okay, and then Rashi goes on to say that but the people of Chamtan did not make any kind of wall. Therefore, it's not a city. And each person has to measure from their own house. So now it's not necessarily the case that you measure from the board, because obviously in the case of Chamtan they would put the board on the other side, the far side. Okay, not the side in between them and Geder, on the side below, right? Not the side above, because this is in other words, they're holding it.
The lower city would have it.
The lower city would have it lower. Would have it on the other side.
No.
They would need to have it before too.
Right.
Well, they're probably benefiting from the one that the people above them, but because there's
that one is too far.
Right. So I don't know why they don't need one above, but the point is that they don't have one of their own.
Right.
And so but the problem here is not physically that you have to count the Techum from that wall. The point is that wall makes it a settlement. and the entire settlement is now treated as one thing, as opposed to us looking at each individual house and giving it its own halacha.
So it's from whatever edge of the town.
Right, but it wouldn't be even considered a town without some kind of wall
It
there.
has a wall, but it's not from the wall. It's from whatever one gets 2,000 dollars.
Whatever the edge of the town is,
Wherever
right?
the edge of-
So even if the wall was on the other side, it wouldn't matter. You still would count up. Okay? Right, so even if you're going to say, right, that per se doesn't matter. Where it is doesn't matter. Okay,
But
so
from Rashi, it seems it also depends on the size of the city. The Geder implies the size of the city.
where do you see that?
It's in Rashi, Geder.
Yeah, right here.
Ir Gdola,
Look.
Ksholim b'nei
It's measuring the
Kadmon
2,000
legeder kalta v'chamtan ir ktana.
Where's that one?
In Rashi where it says Geder.
That might be the next answer, right?
Because the discussion is always about.
Yes, so far we're not up to that answer yet, I don't think.
Maybe I'm jumping ahead.
Yeah, I think you're jumping ahead to the next answer. Okay. So this is a suggestion. So he says, I see from here that, okay, what must the answer be? One has a wall, one doesn't have a wall, and just like the riverbank city, that without a wall, without a large wall, it's not considered all united. So too the, in the case of the settlement on a hill, without some kind of wall, it would be considered temporary, and we would not view it as one entity. Okay? So, right. Okay. So now back to the Gemara. The Gemara says, "Ki ata Rav Dimi." When Rav Dimi came, Amar, he says, no. He says, "Tatroge mimatarge lehu b'nei geder livnei chamtan." The real problem was not a halachic problem of tichum. The real problem was a social problem. The people of Geder would fight with the people of Chamtan. Okay, they would rough them up. They would kill them. Even Rashi says. So what was the point? Umay hitir hitkin. So when it says that Rabbi allowed the people of Geder to go down to Chamtan, he permitted them. It meant he instituted a halakha that they could only go to Chamtan. The people from Chamtan couldn't come to them. Why? So Umay shina Shabbat. And what was the reason on Shabbat that he created this takana? The shchicha b'shichrut. Because people would be drinking. And so if the people of Chamtan went to visit the people of Geder, they would get beaten up and harassed and possibly killed. So they only allowed the people of Geder to come to Chamtan because the people of Chamtan apparently didn't start with them when they came. It was the people of Geder who started with the people of Chamtan. So the Gemara says, Ki as leilatam nami metatregeleho. But why won't when the people of Bnei Geder go to Chamtan, even if they come to Chamtan, aren't they going to start up and rough up the people of Chamtan down there? What's the difference? Answer is Kalba belam mate shav shenin lanabach. That if you put a dog in a city that's not his own, he won't bark for 7 years. In other words, what it means is put a person out of their environment.
They're not going to start trouble.
They don't start trouble the same way when they're not in their normal environment. So hashta nami it says metatrege b'nei Chamtan livnei Geder. So isn't there a concern that the people of Chamtan will start up with the people of Geder? In other words, don't you think that they're going to possibly get into fights anyway? If they come down, in other words, that the people of Geder come down, the people of Chamtan will start with them. No, it's not that simple. So that you might think, in other words, if the people from Geder come down, now the people of Chamtan will have their revenge. Because they're going to say, the people of Geder are out of sorts, they're not in their usual environment, let's beat them up back for everything they do to us. It says, no. The Bnei Geder were bullies, and they wouldn't take it. So they might not start up trouble if they come down to Chamtan. But the people of Chamtan know that if they start up trouble, when the Bnei Geder are visiting, that they're going to be in for trouble. So therefore nobody's going to start. Whereas if the people of Chamtan go to Geder, now they're up there at the mercy of the people of Geder, and now they're in trouble. People of Geder come down, they're not going to start up trouble, but if the people of Chamtan start stirring the pot, then they might be in for some issues. So that was why it was a one-way thing. Rav Safra says, that there's another possibility for why there was this. We're still trying to explain why was there this disparity that the people from Geder can go to Chamtan and not vice versa. So the first answer was that it had to do with one being constituted as a real city, having a real wall that constituted it as a city. The other possibility was that it was a social issue. It was a social issue. The third possibility Rav Safra says is that it was an ira ha'asuya kekeshet. It was a city made like a bow. And what Rashi says that it's talking about is Chamtan was. And there was more than 4,000 amot between the two edges. And as we learned, if there's more than 4,000 amot between the two sides of the city that is shaped like a bow, so now we can no longer unite it into one city. Those two edges can't be united into one city. And therefore, what do? So he says, so therefore, how does it work? So Rashi explains that Modedin lamina keshet kol echad mipetach beito. Okay, so the thing is that remember that we talked about the imaginary line that you would draw across, and then you would count the techum from the imaginary line when you had the bow. But that's only if the two edges are within 4,000 amot of one another. Here they're not. So what ends up happening is, if you live in one of the arms of Chamtan, you're close enough to get there because but if you live in the back of Chamtan, in the curve of the keshet, you're not able to go to get there. So the point is that some people could go and some people could not go, or some people could go only so far into Geder and some people could go less into Geder. Whereas from Geder to Chamtan, the entirety of their Techum was one Techum. It was just the edge of their city. It wasn't shaped like a Keshet. So they could reach Chamtan. And even if you lived all the way at the top of Geder, it didn't matter because they were all one entity. We measure from the edge of Geder. Whereas Chamtan, we have to measure each person from their position because of the curvature of the city. So therefore, the people who lived, so to speak, in the back, in the curved part of Chamtan, will not be able to get to Geder.
So can the people from Geder, who can go from the edge of Geder, whatever,
right?
They go to Chamtan. They can't walk around the whole city because it's like two cities, or in that bow part. Is that
well? It seems like the people from Geder could, because they're at the edge of their city. From the edge of their city to the back of Chamtan was 2,000 amot.
Which takes in the bow.
Right, but the people who are coming from the bow can only get, let's say, up to the edge of of Geder. They can't go any further into Geder.
But we learned.
So if you live in Geder, even if you live up at the top, you're allowed to not start counting your Techum until you get to the bottom. So they're able to get all the way to the bow part of Chamtan, but the people from Chamtan can only walk maybe up to the edge of their city, but they can't get in. See, that's the way.
There was a previous Gemara or Mishnah that talked about what the city that's in a
keshet, yeah,
in a keshet that you count from the
from the bowstring,
right?
But that's what we're saying. That's only if the two arms are within 4,000 amot of each other. So that's why we're saying that it's too wide, so wide that we don't apply that halacha. That's why Rashi has to say that it was too wide. Rav Dimi bar Chanina Amar. So Rav Dimi bar Chanina tried another explanation. That this was another case of people in a large city and a small city. So the large city, in other words, Geder, like you said, was a big city. So when the people of so Rashi explains, Geder ir gedola ukisheolin bnei Chamtan legeder kalta midatan m'chatzi ha'ir. So the people from Chamtan would come together. It was a big city. Their Techum ended. So let's say the people of Chamtan had only 2,000 amot. The first 1,000 was between them and Geder, and the second 1,000 what brought them into Geder, but not all the way in. Whereas the people of Geder, the Chamtan was smaller. So even if they walked 2,000 amot, they can traverse the entirety of Chamtan. So the point of the distinction between Geder and Chamtan is that the people from Geder can walk the entire length of Chamtan. The people from Chamtan can't walk the entire length of Geder because it's so big. So, but the point is that we don't have to invoke the idea of a dakah here. We don't have to invoke the idea that, one had a wall and one didn't have a wall. That was one possible interpretation, but we can also we can apply other interpretations to explain why there's a disparity in the freedoms of the people of Chamtan versus Geder. So in both of these two explanations, it's not an absolute halacha that the people from Chamtan can't go to Geder. It's that some people from Chamtan won't be able to go to Geder, or that the people of Chamtan will only be able to go yay far into Geder, but not all the way in. Okay, so it's a matter of degree, not of kind, according to these last two interpretations. So Rav Kahana had the following version. Rav Toviem, the one that we actually the prior version. So Rav Kahana had the version that we just learned. Rav Tavyomi Matneachi. So Rav Tavyomi had the following: Rav Safra, Rav Dimi Bar Chinena, Chad Amar Ira Suya Kekeshet Havai, V'Chad Amar Anshe Ir Ktana, V'Anshe Ir Gdola Havai. That the same two interpretations. One interpretation that it was a city that Chamtan was made like a keshet, was made like a bow, and that was the problem. The other interpretation being that one was a small city, one was a large city. Okay, so in the first version, we knew who said what. Rav Dimi Bar Chinana was the one who said that it was a large city, small city, and Rav Kahan and Rav Dimi Bar Chinana was the one. I'm sorry, Rav Safra was the one that said it was a city made like a bow, and that was the issue. And Rav Dimi Bar wait a second, why am I missing it here? Right, Rav Safra was the one that said it was made like a bow, and Rav Dimi Bar Chinana was the one that said it was a large city and a small city issue. Okay? The second version says we don't know who said what. There were two opinions, and we don't know who said what.
It looks like Tosfot
they have a whole different interpretation.
Right, they interpret Rav Safra the distance being from the edge, not from here, as opposed to.
Yeah, they have a different. Tosafot has a totally different interpretation of which one was the large city, also, and what the whole question was. So in the end, they didn't really resolve what the situation was here. The point is there was two versions. In one version, we knew who said what. We knew that Rav Safra said it was made like a bow, and Rav Dim Bar Chanana said that it was a large city, small city issue. And according to the version of Rav Tavyomi, we don't know who said which interpretation. But the point is there are four different interpretations of why there is a disparity between Geder and Chamtan. It's not necessarily because one had a retaining wall and one didn't. Now the new Mishnah says, Anshe Ir Gdola Malchin et Kol Ir Ktana, Anshe Ir Ktana Malchin et Kol Ir Gdola. This is what we just learned before, right? The people of a large city can walk the entirety of the small city, and vice versa. Ketzad, how so? Mishaya be'ir gdola v'natan terova be'ir ktana, be'ir ktana v'natan terova be'ir gdola. We just learned this at the top of the Amud, that if somebody is in a large city and they put their eruv tchumin in a small city, or vice versa, then whichever city they put their eruv tchumin in, they can traverse that city in its entirety like it's 4 amot, and they can walk 2,000 amot in any direction. So even though, let's say, you live in a neighboring city, but you put your eruv tchumin in the next city, which was, let's say, 2,000 or 1,000 amot away from your city. No problem. Now, that city that you placed the Eruvei Tchumin in is your city for Shabbat, and you can go 2,000 amot in any direction from that city. You get the city, basically. That's the point. You don't get the location, you get the city when you put it in a city. However, Rabbi Akiva Omer, Ein lo ela mimakom ervo alpayim ama. I disagree, says Rabbi Akiva. The whole concept of Eruvei Tchumin is, wherever you put that bread, you have 2,000 amot from it. So you put that bread in a city, I don't care that it's in a city. You put it in somebody's house, you have 2,000 amot from that house in every direction. That's it. You don't have 2,000 amot in the, you don't have 2,000 amot in the, from the city walls. You have 2,000 amot from where you put the bread. That's all you're going to have.
When Rabbi says something like this, is he saying it from tradition, or is it saying it from...
No, they have a machloket. If they have a machloket, it's not a tradition.
Where he derives this, if it was from tradition, he would have just brought...
He would have probably brought a source. Right, so he's telling you that... now sometimes the Gemara will give the source, but the point is that according to him, even if you put your Eruvei Tchumin in a city, you don't get the entire city with the package. You get wherever you put the Eruvei Tchumin. Now you get 2,000 amot from that place only. Okay? So Amar Lehen Rabbi Akiva. So Amar Lehen Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said to them, Don't you agree with me that if you put your Eruvei Tchumin in a cave, that you only have 2,000 amot from the cave? Amrulo, they said to him, Matai, when is that true? That's only if nobody's living there. But if it's an inhabited cave, and you put your bread in an inhabited cave, you get the entire cave. We don't look at where you place the Eruv. The Eruv establishes that location as your location. So whatever the location is. So if it's an inhabited cave, the entire cave is included. That's why if you put the bread on top of the cave, we just go by the location of the bread. But if you put the bread inside the cave and there are inhabitants in the cave, you get the entirety of the cave, no matter how large it might be. Okay, but when it comes to counting the space, now this was the point, that if we put the Eruv outside of an inhabited area. You put it in a forest, you put it in the woods, you put it in a field. So now you get 2,000 amot, and even if your 2,000 amot end in the middle of the cave, you can't go any further. But if you put the eruv in the cave, you're saying this cave is my place. Even if the cave is 1,000,000 amot, it doesn't matter. You're saying the cave is my place. So too, if you put the eruv in a city, you're saying this town is my town. I want to go by the tchumin of this town. I don't want to go by the tchum of my bread. Whereas Rabbi Akiva is taking it very literally and saying where your bread is where you are. Now the Gemara says, as we turn to Amud Bet, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said Shavat be'ir hareva l'Rabbanan Masekhet kula b'chutz l'alpayim ama. Hiniach et eruvo be'ir hareva en lo mimakom eruvo el alpayim ama. Here's an interesting halacha from Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel. If you stayed over in a destroyed city, in other words, it's still it's a city that still has walls, but it's a desolate city. It's a ghost town. Okay, you're in a ghost town, but you stay there for Shabbat. So then, what happens is you stay there at the beginning of Shabbat. You get to walk the entirety of the city. It could be 5 million amot. We don't know how big it is. As big as it is, and you get 2,000 amot outside the borders of the city. That's what it says. However, if you placed your eruv in such a city where there are no inhabitants, you didn't stay there for Shabbat, but you placed the bread there. Since there are no inhabitants, you only get 2,000 amot from where you put the eruv. You don't get 2,000 amot from the entirety of the city. You can't walk the length of the city.
Why you have to attribute to city definition of
Walls?
No. Why if you say it's not where you are, it's a city. A city counts as a whole place. Mm-hmm. Then why not? If with that definition, why not be able to say?
Well, here it's a ghost town, so there's nobody there.
I know, but if you stay there, you do. That's it.
Right. If you stay there, you're making an inhabited place.
By one person.
Right, by one person, but it's a city.
One person can inhabit a whole city.
Yeah, you inhabit it. It's your city.
Whole city.
Yeah, it's your city.
What's the difference between that and an empty cave?
It's empty.
Right.
In other words, if you stayed in the cave, according to this, you're inhabiting it. That's it. You're inhabiting it. We're only talking about hiniyah.
Definition of habitation.
Right. Habitation could be one person, but if you leave the eruv there, nobody's really living there. You just put the eruv in a certain. You just look at the bread now. Whereas if you inhabit it and then you're saying this entire location is my location.
But if there was one other person living there and you left your bread there, then you get the whole city.
Right.
As your
right.
Who's the Tana coming?
Nobody yet. This is Amoraim talking. So now Rabbi Eliezer, Omer, Rabbi Elazar maybe. Rabbi Eliezer, let's say, Omer, Echad Shavat v'Echad Iniyach. He says, no, it's not true. Whether you stayed over in the ghost town, or even if you left your bread in the ghost town, you can walk the entirety of the city and 2,000 amot outside the city. In other words, according to him, once it is an established place of residence, even if there's nobody living there now, if people ever lived in the cave, if people ever lived in the city, even if you leave your bread there, you're taking the city. You're putting your bread down symbolically to say, I'm part of this town, I'm living in this town, I'm living in the city. You're not placing it there because you want from that location your eruv to be counted. So now, this is a machloket, right? There's a ghost town. Do you have to inhabit the ghost town in order to get the town, or is putting the bread down going to be enough? So now the Gemara says, maybe there is an objection. Amar lahen Rabbi Akiva said to the Chachamim, atem modim li, don't you agree with me? Be'noten et eruvo b'ma'arash, ein lo mimakom eruvo ela alpayim ama. Don't you agree that if you leave your bread inside a cave, that you have only 2,000 amot from where you left the bread? Amrulo, they said to him, so what did the Chachamim say? They said, no, that's only true when there's nobody living in it. Okay? In other words, they said to him, when there's nobody living in the cave, that's where we go by. You placed your eruv in the middle of a 1,000 amma cave. Okay, so or let's say a 2,000 amma cave. So it's right in the middle. So you placed your eruv there. So now, if there's nobody living there, according to this, you can walk 1,000 amot to the edge of the cave, and then only 1,000 more amot, because you can only count from where your bread was. Ha'en badiurin, if there's nobody living there, module, that means that the rabbis agree. When there's nobody living in the cave, it's uninhabited, so that means that you go by wherever you put your bread down. They agreed with Rabbi Akiva. So look at that. You see that when it's uninhabited, leaving the bread there doesn't help you. So that seems to contradict Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer is saying that a ghost town, an abandoned town, okay, even leaving the bread, you get the entire place. No, the Chachamim agree that if it's abandoned, if there's nobody living there, then you don't get the entire place.
Unless there's a difference between a cave and a tent.
So my in bat yurin. So Rabbi Eliezer will answer you. Rabbi Eliezer is going to answer you. Ena ro'oya ledira. It doesn't mean that there's nobody living there. It means it's not habitable. In other words, it's a cave that you can't live in. That's why. It doesn't go by whether it's actually inhabited right now. It goes by the fact that it's whether it is fit for a residence or not. If it's fit for residence, even if there's nobody living there right now, it's still good. Tashma come in here, Shavat be'ir, afilu gedola k'Antiochia. That if you stayed in a city, even if it's as big as Antiochia, and if you stayed in a cave, even a cave as big as the one of Tzidkiyahu, the king of Yehuda, you can walk the entire length of the cave and outside it 2,000 amot. And what do you see here? You see that the city is compared to the cave. Just like the cave is empty, so too we're talking about an empty city. And what does it say? If you stayed in the cave, or if you stayed in the city, you get the entire city or the entire cave. Why? Because it's uninhabited without you. Implying that if you left your bread there in the city that's empty, or you left your bread in the cave that's empty, it wouldn't be good. It wouldn't work. You wouldn't get the entire cave. You wouldn't get the entire city. That supports the first view of Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel. Mani. So who's the author here? If you're telling me it's Rabbi Akiva, it can't be Rabbi Akiva's view, because Rabbi Akiva said that anytime you leave your bread anywhere, we only measure from the place of the bread. Rather, it must be the Chachamim. And what are the Chachamim saying? In an abandoned city or an abandoned cave, if you leave your bread, it's no good. You don't get the entire cave. You don't get the entire city. You must stay there for Shabbat. That's what it says. Shabbat. The person stay there. Don't say that. Tema ir dumya demara. It could be that the city is being compared to the cave. In other words, lo tema ir dumya demara. Don't say that the city is compared to the cave. The other way around. Say that the cave is compared to the city. Ma ir yeshiva af mara yeshiva. That we're talking about a cave and a city that are inhabited. They are inhabited. So if they're inhabited, why then does it say that you have to stay there? Why can't you just leave your bread there and acquire the entire city or the entire cave? So for Rabbi Akiva, and it's Rabbi Akiva, Amar ein lo mimakom irvo el alpayim ama, uvishavat modeh. So in other words, this is really Rabbi Akiva's view. Rabbi Akiva's view is even an inhabited cave, even an inhabited city, if you leave your bread there, you only get 2,000 amot from the bread. But he agrees that if you physically stayed there, it's good enough. If you physically stayed in the place, you get 2,000 amot from the entire town, from the entire cave. But if you left your bread in the cave, even if it's inhabited, you left your bread in the town, even if it's inhabited, you only get from the place of the bread. But the Chachamim, apparently, don't make this distinction. They don't hold like this distinction. They say whether you leave the bread or you stay there, okay, it's still right. If it's capable of being inhabited, right? If it's a place that is a habitable place, then you get the entire city and the entire town. They're not necessarily making a distinction between staying over and we can't. In other words, we can't prove anything basically because we can interpret it either way. So now the Gemara says, but doesn't it say like the cave of Tzidkiyahu? Kim arat Tzidkiyahu v'la kim arat Tzidkiyahu. It means in some ways like the cave of Tzidkiyahu, and in other ways not. Kim arat Tzidkiyahu gedola. That when it comes to it's similar to the cave of Tzidkiyahu, that it's very large. That was the point. It's a very large area. But it's not similar to the place of Tzidkiyahu. Why not? Because whereas the place of Tzidkiyahu, the cave of Tzidkiyahu, was not inhabited anymore, we're talking here about an inhabited cave, and we're talking about Rabbi Akiva, who says that you can stay over in the place and you can get the 2,000 amot from the entire cave. Mar Yehuda ashkechenu levei mavrachta de kamotve eruvayu bebei knishta de be agover. So one time Mar Yehuda saw that the people of Mavrachta were putting their eruv in the Beit Knesset of Be Agover. Amar lahu, he said to them, Gavu Beit Fe, put it further into the building. So you get more space. In other words, he was saying, apparently there was a synagogue, this city, a neighboring city placed its Eruvei Tchumin in in the next city. and they placed it in the synagogue. So he said, don't place it at the doorway of the synagogue, place it on the other side of the synagogue so you get even more space, because you want to go that direction. Let's say they wanted to go east. Okay, so they wanted to go another 2,000 amot east. So he said, don't place it in the west side of the synagogue. Put it at the east end of the synagogue, so that way you get even more. Amar le Rava, Rava said to him, Palga'a, you are a divider of people. Why are you a divider of people? Because clearly you're following Rabbi Akiva's view that even when you put your Eruvet Chomin in a city or in a house, you have to count the 2,000 amot from the position of the bread. And if you're looking at the 2,000 amot from the position of the bread, then you would want to have it all the way on the eastern side of the synagogue. So he says, nobody follows the position of Rabbi Akiva. We all agree that if you put your Eruvet Chomin in a city, if you put it in a building, you put it in a house, or you put it in a city, that your Eruv is acquired in the entire city. You acquire the entire city. The entire city is now considered for you like 4 amot, and you get 2,000 amot in every direction from the city limits, not from the place where your bread is actually situated. Hadran alach ketad me'abrin. We finish the parak, and Bezrat Hashem will start the new parak tomorrow.